We we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to BioBridge. It's been so long that I'm kind of forgetting what our show is called. It's not good. 3 weeks. 3 weeks feels like forever. Sorry about that. Um, but we have a very special guest today, and I'm going to let Ibrahim introduce his friend.
Sure, sure. So hi, it's been a while, everyone, right? It's
Feels like
actually
forever.
all Tits's fault, by the way. So,
It's always my fault.
but yeah, we have a very special guest, Nick Allen, very dear friend. I've known him for what, like 6 years now.
Yeah.
And he's been very um, dear friend and professionally as well as personally. I'm very happy to have him with us. And well, we'll go for an intro, right? We'll ask him to. I
Yeah,
don't want to
what do you know
say.
about Nick? I
About
think let's have
yeah.
Nick. Let's
Well,
have Nick tell us.
you are just saying that you've run out of nice things to say about me.
No, because it was like I started out this
I
way,
have,
right?
I have one really good one, and that is Nick has the most Japanese background of us all here. So,
I spent all day putting this together, going through closets and boxes and putting pictures on the wall. Thought it was a little bit more mature
that-
than my
this
email.
is this is BioBridge, where we connect Japan to the rest of the world, and so your decor is absolutely on point.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I first went to Japan back in the late 1980s. I was a student. I went with a national youth orchestra that I was a member of. I played trombone. And it was just one of those things, it was, whether it's like a hit of a crack cocaine or something, it just fascinated me. And so when I was coming up to graduate from college, I learned about the JET program, and I was selected to go as part of the JET program, which is still running today.
Yeah, I was gonna
I
say.
understand one of the most successful internationalization um, uh, initiatives ever done by any country, as I understand it. And I was sent to a remote small town in Aomori. And for those who don't know that, it's a prefecture on the very far northern tip of Honshu. The advantage was I learned to ski there. I learned to drink sake with the best of them. But I also learned to speak Japanese because many people that I interacted with on a daily basis didn't speak very much English.
It's not standard Japanese there.
Exactly. And so that's why I explain why my Japanese is very bad. It was funny, after the big earthquake in 2011, I remember watching on TV a fisherman from Hachinohe talking about the water and everything like that. And I was, taken back to my time there with the Nambu Ben, which is completely
Where were
unintelligible.
you at that time?
I was in a town called Naheji, which, if you look at the little the hook of Mutsu Bay, is in the southeastern corner. It's actually a port.
No, but I meant at during the earthquake on
Oh,
311.
I was back in
You are
the
back in the
States.
US.
Yeah. I'd actually just broken up with a girl, and I was watching CNN at like 2 a.m. or 11 late at night, and it was just like, it was one of those things that you couldn't take your eyes off because it was
My
so.
goodness, you're getting personal already.
Yeah.
Yeah, continue.
So, and then I
Can you
spent
tell?
2 years in Tokyo teaching at a Eikaiwa language school, and really enjoyed my time there. I'd met my first wife, who was an American, which brought me to America, and I've been in the US ever since, even though I'm not married to that lady now. But when I worked with Medpace, I was very much involved in their initiatives to work with Japanese companies, and I would go to Japan 2 or 3 times a year to
Yeah,
work with.
for those for those who don't know, Medpace, it's a clinical CRO running clinical studies. Okay,
Exactly,
some background.
exactly. It was established in 1992, and so it was 2009 when I went there, and they were really getting into growth mode. My first trip to Japan was with the and he's still the president and CEO, Dr. August Trendle. And at that time, it was really meeting with the headquarters of the US or European affiliate companies. That was the primary point of business. As we became more entrenched into the Japanese market, we started doing a lot of work with Japanese companies or divisions of larger companies which have a pharmaceutical division, and became their US agent, holding their IND as well as running their studies in the United States and other parts of the world.
So you were helping Japanese companies run studies outside of Japan? Is
Correct.
that okay?
Correct.
At Medpace. So this
That
was at the beginning.
initially, and then as we developed the presence more, initially it was through partnerships with Japanese CROs.
That's how they all start.
Exactly, expanding to running US run studies in Japan.
Because typically, a company that wants to access the Japanese market is that they have a study that has Japan, and so they got to go into Japan, talk to the CNIX, ETS, the bigger companies to do some sort of some subcontract. That's the typical entry point, really. But did you
Correct.
go in to find clients like without having a Japan study?
Correct. Correct. And a
Wow.
lot of clients,
Okay.
smaller clients, were looking to do the development in the United States to get that
Mhm.
all important IND,
Yeah.
which still is considered one of the gold standards of drug
Yeah.
development, even if they were never going to do any clinical studies in Japan. Once they had secured an IND, it was there for the out licensing and for other companies maybe to pick it up or get the North American rights for the product or something like that.
Nice. And then correct me if I'm wrong, Medpace is very strong in neurology, correct?
Well, actually, when I joined it, it
Yeah.
was metabolic was their big thing.
Really?
Dr. David Orloff was the chief medical officer, and he had previously been the division director at the FDA of the metabolic division. And so metabolic was the big thing, and it's still a big thing with them, but they have grown, and the way they've done it is by identifying SMEs, subject matter experts, physicians, PhDs in certain therapeutic areas, and then building around those individuals, to train the appropriate CRAs, project managers, all the things like that.
They do have a good ophthalmology department also, I think.
That has been developed since I left, but I understand that is the case now.
Correct.
Okay.
So
So
now
where
you
did
have
you go after Medpace? And then we'll go back to your work for Medpace because it's
Okay.
probably intersecting most with Japan.
So exactly. So I was part of Medpace as they expanded to Japan, the country head, and I worked very closely in introducing him to the clients that we currently had. And I actually recruited the first BD person to come and work there in Japan. And I had been led to believe, because I was looking for management experience, that this individual would report to me. And then the strategy changed, and they said no. And it was really sort of going back in my career 9-10 years. And so I looked to leave. And so I went to a small CRO, which had a very narrow therapeutic brand. It worked very much in spinal cord injuries, and it was very well known for that. And I worked to try and take the experience of consenting people after a devastating accident into other areas, like burns was another area, stroke, another area, where people would be consented after some life-changing event and then be able to connect the dots for them to be perhaps enrolled into a study.
So were you working at DP Clinical when Remedy Pharmaceuticals was working with DP Clinical?
No, that was before my time, but the Woolsey study, the HEAL study, was the first one when I got to know your current colleagues.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, so everyone I've mentioned, Nick has been very instrumental or very influential in my career. So he's actually the one that introduced me to my current company, um, because we were working on a Japanese asset. They were looking for someone to look at Japanese publications and do some due diligence on it. So that's where I kind of started with my company, um, and left clinical work to work full time at my current work. So thank you on screen. This is going to be forever.
Exactly. It's gonna
I
exist.
owe you.
Hey, it was my pleasure. And like Tetsu, connecting people is one of the things that I think all three of us do. And it's one of the key things in business development, whether it's in licensing and out licensing assets, or it's in, getting business for a company like a CRO where I'm currently employed.
So after DP Clinical, now you are at?
Oh, so I then made a break into the world of packaging and labeling, storage and
Oh my goodness.
distribution. It was a pure management role, but I also realized that it was a very fast learning curve about storage and distribution. And then a lot of it was, you would package the drug and then it would sit in the warehouse until a site needed it. The company, I didn't realize at the time, had a very successful direct to patient business during the pandemic. So drugs were being directly shipped, people on clinical trials, rather than going to the clinic and being handed
Oh.
the medicines. It was being shipped directly from the depot to people's. And at the same time, it was bought by a private equity group who paid way too much for it, and they expected this to continue. They also had some operational issues, which is a whole nother story. And, I was there for about 8 months. I had people reporting to me across North America and Europe, and we were getting ready to open the depot in Singapore. I wasn't a huge fan of that, just because I thought Korea or Japan would be better, shorter shipping distances. I remember the first time I went to Singapore and I flew through Narita, and I thought, I hadn't really paid any attention. Hours, it's 8 hours from
Yeah, yeah.
Narita to
You
Singapore.
think it's 2 hours?
Exactly. And so to
It's a
me,
red eye flight.
yeah, it doesn't. Yes, it's an easy place to do business. Everybody speaks English, but it's an island not near anything else, sort of thing. And I was really strongly pushing for Japan, and especially with Japanese businesses, they will do business much more quickly if there's a representative in Japan who can be summoned to the office and go and explain what went wrong or be congratulated for things went right. It's still very much the business culture of Japan.
Well, I was going to say, so you have a U.S. packaging company. If you were to set up something in Japan, uh, I mean, the Japanese logistics, oftentimes it's much more elaborate. The packaging would be much more complex or more, how would I say, well thought out. Not just like a bunch of things in a box, but rather, sequentially placed, and things are, more detail oriented.
Right. Exactly. But I was just thinking, where are the studies that they're supporting? That's where you want to have the depot closer to it. Korea, offers a lot of incentives to biopharmaceutical companies. Plus, if you're doing, it's not 8 hours from Incheon to Narita.
Indeed, that is like an
Probably
hour and a
Singapore
half.
is probably good for Australian studies and New Zealand.
Potentially,
Perhaps.
exactly.
Yeah.
But then why not be in Australia or New Zealand?
Exactly.
So, but anyway, after 8 months or so, my position was eliminated. It's interesting that everybody who was on my team, they've all left, which I've was very flattered by, and it's an interesting jumble, for want of a better term. And then unfortunately, I was out of work for almost 8 months. So what I had done, and this is going back to a story, I was in a izakaya in Akasaka Mitsuke called Kawanone. And I was there with a friend of mine, Hiroshi, who works for Mochida. My friend Shay, who was with Thermo Fisher and is now based in the UK, and Makino-san, I'm trying to think of his first name, who's now with the Ministry of Health, Welfare and Labour in a very senior position, MD, PhD, as well as a public health degree. And we said, if we ever started a company, why didn't we call it Kawanone? What a great sound of the river. And so I had been asked by an acquaintance of mine who worked at a small Japanese company that they were looking to select a vendor for a study that they were going to run. And so I basically acted as the OMI, worked with them to ensure, because one of the biggest things I've always noticed is that the Japanese company would perhaps go to a quintiles, and this is a very small study with 24 patients and a couple of sites. You want perhaps to be looking at a smaller company that would give you the attention that you require and you deserve. And so I helped work with them to help in their vendor selection. And so I formed this company. I bought the domain. I bought my email address. I'm waiting for somebody called Mr. Kawanone to run for Prime Minister. They can buy the domain from me from millions and millions of yen. But
it's not that common.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Or the izakaya will come after you. Yeah?
Well, maybe. Yeah. I did check that, but it was kawanone.com was available, so I took it.
Nice.
And then I just over a year ago, I started with Premier Consulting, the division of Premier Research, which is a global CRO, but they have a consulting division formerly known as Camargo Pharmaceuticals, offering a full service consulting services, which I'm really enjoying. A lot of it is very early phase, a lot of very interesting novel concepts. Camargo made its name in the 505(b)(2) space, which is something quintessential American. In most parts of the world, it's either brand name or generic. And the 505(b)(2) route is a really nice way for either companies to extend their patent life, taking an established product and finding a new route of administration or new indications, or for other smaller companies to take a product that perhaps has been around for a long time, so it has a well understood safety profile and characteristic, and use it for perhaps either a new indication, new route of administration. And so I'm finding it to be a lot of fun. I'm learning more about CMC than I ever thought I'd ever know.
Yeah, well, obviously the 505(b)(2), for those who don't really know what we're talking about here, it's basically drugs that are already approved could be licensed to somebody else who could take it into the clinic and get another approval under another indication with a different formulation or whatever. But you could refer to the original NDA from the original manufacturer.
Exactly. And so we actually can do paper NDAs for some products where we don't actually have to do a clinical trial. It may involve some very sophisticated modeling, but for everybody who knows what a phase 2 or a phase 3 clinical trial costs, a few $100,000 in PK modeling is a much more reasonable route.
It's not the most scientific and exciting thing for some companies to think about or to pick up, but it's something. There's a need out there, and it could be quick wins. You don't need to redo all your talks or all your pharmacology, preclinical pharmacology all that can be referenced to the original NDA. So
And I'm brought back to how important it is. So my daughter, my 8-year-old daughter, has a best friend who has a tree nut allergy. So everywhere we go, we take her EpiPen with her in case she has a reaction. She's really excited because she's going to get an inhaler instead. So rather than a stranger or me, I'm her friend's dad, she can be taught to administer it to herself without the fear of the needle, which I think is a really, great way,
yeah,
and will reduce her fear in trying new things as she grows up.
absolutely.
A very good point.
Needlephobia is a big problem.
Yes. And I don't know how common it is in Japan. I wasn't a parent in Japan in the same way I am in the US, but
Well, I heard in the general public it's like 15%
okay.
needlephobia. So it's a market.
Right. And, peanut butter is a standard that most kids have in their sandwiches for school in the US.
Yeah.
Mhm.
In Japan, not so much peanut butter, but
Right.
but
But nut allergy is a thing
yeah,
in
it
Japan
is
as well.
allergy is very high. Rate of allergy in Japan is very high. But
So,
so going back to, I guess, BioBridge, so you've done a lot of work in the US. You've done a lot of work for Medpace setting up things in Japan. And I know with DP Clinical too, you did, work with Japanese clients at times as well. Um, I guess I'd really love to know how your work, how you would characterize your work, especially in BD in the US, and then compare that with your work in Japan. Educate us, please.
So in the US, there is this thing about a lack of transparency. People always try and avoid salespeople. Whether you're walking across a car lot, I'm thinking about getting a new car, and then somebody comes over and tries to talk. It's exactly the same with BD, but you have to be there. Otherwise, people will never know about you, and people will respond much better to an individual. Call Nick as opposed to go to info@premierresearch.com to find to get help. The Japanese, I find, when working there, are much more open to having a discussion with a business development person if you can convince them as to why. And it doesn't have to be a complicated thing. We have a lot of experience in this therapeutic area. We noticed that you're doing this work in that area. We have some interesting solutions for you. I'd love to be able to come and present them to you. You have to have a reason for a meeting. So much in the US, let's meet for lunch, and people will just talk around about things, but there won't necessarily be a direct result from the meeting. In Japan, it's very much we're having a meeting and we're expecting a result. This is what we're going to achieve from this meeting and things like that. And so in some ways, it's a much more linear process, whereas in the US, it's much more of a interpersonal process. And I think that's how, the Japanese won't talk about non-business things at a business meeting. It's afterwards over the beer or the sake sort of thing. Whereas too many people go into Japan thinking it's going to be just like it is in the US, and it's not. There are certain unwritten rules, I would say, like wear a dark suit. Don't go to Japan, even if it's the middle of summer, in a light suit, because, you would look too different and perhaps give them not the same reassurance that you can be like them, sort of thing. And then working with US companies going into Japan, I always take the story of how I was in a taxi and the taxi couldn't find the address that we were going to. It was a small pharma company in Osaka. And the guy turns the meter off and radios back to head office. In the US, we know that the guy would have just kept on driving around with the meter on until he finally figured it out. And so I remind my colleagues, particularly in project management and finance, okay, this is what the Japanese, they expect. This is not a learning curve. They're not paying us to learn. Same happened in Kyoto. A colleague and I, we negotiated with a taxi driver to drive us around for a couple of hours. Ends up being 3 hours, and so I'm saying, well, it was, I think, 10,000 yen for the 2 hours. So we want to give him 15,000 yen for the 3 hours. And he wouldn't take it because he had contracted with us for this set amount rather than the time. And in the same way, change orders to, the scope of a program, they shouldn't really happen. It's like when I give my daughter, here's, $5 to go and spend at the store. You can't spend more than $5. And you also, in the US, you have to take into account there is tax sort of thing. It's one of those things, but they have, once you have won the business, they have that money allocated, and getting it changed, unless there's a very strong rational reason for it, you've decided to open 5 more sites and enroll 20 more patients, it's very hard to get that story over to them, particularly the older senior people within a Japanese organization.
That's a new layer I've not heard of. So,
Yeah.
very, very interesting.
So
I think that I'm pretty much in agreement with everything except just the first part. I'm not too sure. What you were talking about, the meetings are being very linear. The Japanese would be looking for an outcome for every meeting. That I'm not too sure. It feels to me oftentimes they're like, okay, let's have another meeting for this.
True, but maybe the meeting to have a meeting, but that's why you have the meeting to introduce yourself, and then you can have the follow-up meeting, and and then the whole thing that everybody knows about Japan, just because they say yes, doesn't mean to say they agree with you.
Exactly. Yes means I heard you.
Exactly.
But there is what is called nemawashi. So it's all these pre-meetings until you actually get to that meeting, which perhaps is what you're referring to. There's a ceremonial meeting at the end. We're discussing items, but we're not really discussing them. It's already decided. It's all that happened before.
True. And that whole process whereby they will read their slides to you.
Yes. Indeed.
Now, Nick, what about Japanese? So you've helped Japanese companies run studies in the US, right? Or globally. What tips would you give Japanese companies coming into the US to, like obviously their vendor selection, like you mentioned, they're talking to IQVIA and Syneos and all the big ones because, hey, like you could trust these names, right?
Right.
But like when talking to a smaller CRO, how, it must be a difficult process.
Well, it comes down to a question of fit. Obviously they want a company that is going to carry through on their plans and their estimates and things like that. But in the same way, you don't need, a Rolls Royce to, yes, it's very powerful, but is that really what you need, for commuting every day into New York City where cars get damaged and, there are potholes and stuff like that. So don't, and the other thing is don't waste a lot of people's times. Small companies are famous for sending out an RFP to 10, 15 companies, and each company that completes the proposal if you look at the time of the people to put it in, the proposal writer, the input from the statistician, the medical advisor, we're talking about several $1,000s, so, let's be, if you want to include one of the big guys, take a big guy, take a small guy, and take one in the middle or something like that. But have a rationale rather than getting 15 BD guys excited about your study. Really, get to know what their capabilities are, whether they can do it, and cost is, at the end of the day, cost is what it is. Sort of thing, but you want the company that could perform, and a smaller company may be putting its A team on, whereas if you have only a $2 or $3 million study with an IQVIA or one of the big guys, you're probably not going to get their A teams, sort of thing.
Totally right. I think for a small Japanese company to assess global CROs, there's quite a few layers of barrier. I mean, not just the language, but the way the services are presented. The Japanese CRO would really go with just headcount. This many sites need this many CRAs. But in the States, it's all the tasks one by one, and it's very hard for them to understand all that. So how do you go through like teaching the Japanese client about, this is how it's done in the US?
I basically talk about, different types of CROs and the things that you want to have. A lot of CROs sell the one-stop shopping. We have our own EDC system, our own ERT system, our own risk-based monitoring system. Which are the things that are really important to be controlled? Because you may want to go with a smaller CRO that uses a very robust EDC system, even if it isn't part of them. And I think it's that concern that they have when going with smaller companies that perhaps don't own their own proprietary software and management tools, but those are not necessarily a big deal killer. You want to make sure you have the right people, the right relationships, the people that will be able to communicate with you on your schedule. So, you've got a project manager who's based in California. That might be that's much better for Japan than it is for the East Coast.
Yeah, that's true. So, how do you try to establish a trust with the Japanese client? Because, a lot of it becomes factual, right? There's always this kind of arm's length behind, capability presentations and whatnot. It's so hard to kind of actually get to know someone.
Oh, absolutely.
And so how have you managed that?
I feel I've been lucky in my time, that I've had the opportunity to interact with many different Japanese people. And as the Japanese employment becomes more fluid. Now, at one time, people would go to work for the Japanese pharma company, and that's where they would be for the rest of their lives, and they would retire. And now it's much more common that people move around for various reasons. They want to do something else. A friend of mine was pushed into HR, which is with the company he was with, which he had no interest in. He was really interested in clinical development and changed companies. So it's the personal relationships of making sure that you respond in a timely manner. So when they send you an email, no more than 24 hours before a response, or at least an acknowledgement, even if you don't have the answer. I think it's really being following through on what you say you will do, sort of thing. And it's, it may seem very simple, but I know it happens a lot in US culture. People don't, had a call with somebody. I will send you the slide deck before the end of the day. It still isn't in my email. Just very simple things of following through and making sure that you communicate appropriately. The way that the Japanese always have, and at one time Microsoft Office used to have, Japanese, initial phrases to use for the time of year or something that I thought that was always a little bit twee. But being something, cognizant of what they're doing, where they are, making sure that when their holidays are and things like that, just to show an understanding of what's going on in the wider world before I, communicate with people in Japan. I will take a quick look at the Japan Times just to see what's happening, making sure there hasn't been some terrible earthquake in a part of the world that we've not heard about. I think, we have the ability now, and it's so much easier than 10, 15 years ago when I first started business development, to find out about people, about the country, what's happening with the company, before going in and knowing about that, either whether it's part of your opening pitch, but also in case they bring it up with you, in the same way that they would also want to perhaps know what's happening at the FDA, or why did Peter Marks resign, and things like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. So it's basically, establishing any kind of common ground or a common interest,
Right.
and breaking down that barrier. Yeah.
Speaking the same language, not necessarily Japanese.
Exactly.
Well,
And
that is very true. Whether it's for any ex-US, and this is part of the problem. Coming from another country and having lived in Japan, I perhaps have more of a cultural awareness of this, as opposed to some Americans who think everything's like America.
Yeah, you can't blame them if that's all you've known.
Right.
The only barometer you have to compare to. But hey, currently there's a lot of attention on Japan. I think from an investment perspective, from a just political turmoil going on. People are looking outside of the U.S. and Japan is picking up a lot of attention, especially with the yen that's really been devaluated over the past few years. So you have experience opening a subsidiary in Japan, right? Were you like hands-on opening that subsidiary, or you?
They used a third party, and they brought somebody in.
In Japan, or
in Japan, sort
okay.
of thing. And
you oversaw the process, or
I'm sorry.
Did you oversee the process?
I was a part of the process. I didn't oversee it. The company is very much a top-down managed company sort of thing. But I was the one that found the BD person, and I was the one that developed the plan for BD, because I wasn't involved. They made an acquisition I think soon after I left, obviously to get a critical mass of people within the company. But it was the BD plan that was my remit.
All right. Because like I said, there's companies that have a clinical study that includes Japan, and now suddenly they need like a local entity, or else it's like what's called EOR,
right?
Employment of record, right? You can't do that forever, so they're looking at how to expand. So either working with Cynic or ETS, or buy a company locally, or set up a local affiliate.
Right. And Jetro does a lot to help that, and that's part of their mission. There used to be a wonderful organization in New York called New York Pharma Forum, and it was a discussion group. All the Japanese, particularly the Japanese nationals who were working for Japanese pharma companies here, would attend. All the business development people from the major pharma companies would show up at that, and there'd be a presentation on something that may or may not be interesting, and then afterwards there was some sushi and beer, and which is when the real business was done. And a lot of my initial Japanese contacts came from that. It was unfortunate that right before the pandemic there was a change in leadership, and then the pandemic hit, and many of the Japanese nationals, the scientific liaisons, as they're often called in the company, went back to Japan because of that, and it just never got the momentum to start again. The other thing that's also happened is at one time, all Japanese companies were in New York, and then they all moved to New Jersey, and now they're all moving to Boston. Just interesting to see the Japanese companies that I knew or worked with have now relocated their US subsidiary to.
Well, they still keep their clinical development in New Jersey, most of it.
I'm sorry?
The clinical development.
Oh, true.
It's usually still
In
New
many
Jersey.
cases, that is the case, yes. But now, with the decentralization and Boston area being so expensive, people will be back living in New Jersey, but working for a company with a Boston address and go there once a month, maybe, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's there, but it's not there, sort of thing. It's an interesting dichotomy, which
I love the decentralization.
Right. I do too. I've done it for years. I haven't worked in an office since 2003.
Wow. Okay. You're a senpai to me. I started in 2012 to work from home. I didn't know that we could do this in our industry because I was working at Eisai at the time. I got married. My wife is from Nagasaki, and she was going to school, so she had to stay in Nagasaki. So I had to fly into Nagasaki from Tokyo on Friday, come back on Sunday, go to work for a week, go back.
Right.
I stopped that, went over to the CRO side, and I was able to work from home.
Got it. Yeah. So yeah, but it's unfortunate now because the company policy is cameras on. When I was working from home, up until about 2015, it was always just a conference call. So you'd have your headset on, you'd fold laundry, you'd empty the dishwasher.
They didn't have the technology. We only had like a Polycon, right?
Exactly. In the middle of the conference room table that nobody could hear anybody on.
Well, you had the slave mic.
Right, and then somebody say somebody's rustling papers. I can't hear.
Oh my goodness, one of those brings back memory. I don't know when they faded away. 2017, 18.
I think it's really the pandemic that really propelled us into using video conference, and I think Zoom did it first.
I think so. Yeah,
then Microsoft
right.
acquired whoever owned Teams beforehand. Was it Skype? Yeah.
Yep. That's true.
That's how it all started. Well. Any other things, Ryan, that you wanted to ask?
Yeah, no, I do want to know. So, we always talk about people have to follow Japanese norms or like soften the Japanese, right? But, Nick, and Tetsu, you too, both Tetsu, I know with Tetsunagi, you're helping Japanese companies come to the US and North America, etc. And Nick, you've done that as well, right?
Right.
So, I always want to, and we're going to have hopefully Japanese viewers as well. Like, how can the Japanese people, companies, etc., make it easier for North American vendors or global vendors to want to work with them?
Great.
Not be like, oh, what, like, forget this RFP. We don't want to put in time for this RFP because this is going to be a difficult company. We're going to have to hold their hand, et cetera, et cetera. You don't want every business, right? When you're, unfortunately, right? You're not going to say it, but you don't want every business.
Right.
But like, how can the Japanese side also make it easier for?
I think it's the flexibility. You go to a Japanese company and you get pushed into a little side meeting room with some 1970s furniture and sometimes still a big ashtray in the middle of the table, and you do the exchanging of cards and things like that, which everybody's been taught about. You pick up the card and you say something of interest about the person on that. And I think the Japanese, one of the things I realized is that when they used to visit, oh, well, we'll do a working lunch. And that's something that is an oxymoron because, the Japanese like to take their time for lunch and the working lunch, and this, they're not sure whether to eat or talk or things like that. And it's just they need to show that they can blur the lines a little bit, sort of thing. So in a PowerPoint presentation, you don't have to read every word. You don't have to have words. You may have a cartoon or a schematic or something up on the slide just to show that they're trying to be a little bit more flexible, and I'm noticing it more. So when I first started business development, the young Japanese person who spoke the best English was basically translating for the senior person who was waiting to go outside and have another cigarette. Now, that generation has pretty much retired, and now it's a much more flexible, there are still some certain norms that expect to be adhered to, but it is changing because of the more younger people, men and women who are coming to the US and in positions of leadership.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Tetsu?
Yeah. No, I think Nick is right on. There's lots of younger, what they call kikokushijo, which are young kids who went out to study outside of Japan and they come back. So they've got a good cultural and linguistic understanding of the Western world. And they're using that to their advantage in all these companies. And also the companies are, they're actively hiring these kids rather than hiring somebody who's got all sorts of experience, relevant experience. They hire somebody who's got a very good, bilingual skills, and then they teach them and train them. We're seeing a lot of that in the companies in Japan. So less and less, there's a dependency on languages only. I think, which is a tremendous thing. There's still a lot of dependency, but it's much less than before, I think.
Yeah.
And culturally too. Culturally too, there's more propensity to go out and go to the brave new world, go to Boston, go to San Francisco. The young kids are out there.
So I want you guys to pitch what you guys. I mean, Tetsunagi, like you've never really pitched anything on BioBridge. Can you go ahead and just do it? And then
Out of
Nick, I don't know if
but
Kawaname is active or not, but I'd love for you to tell us what you can do as well.
let's
So you want to
let Nick.
go?
I take a go.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure. Well, tetsunagi means handholding in Japanese. So right there, it's a symbolism of collaboration. It's also symbolizing how I bring my clients into the right, lead them in the right direction. So what I do, what I specialize is really the connection, the connecting across disciplines, across borders, across languages. So this is what I love the most, connecting people, but also connecting experts, whether they're clinical experts, CMC experts, BD folks, investors, startups, big pharma. uh, Wherever there's connections to be made, that's where I have the most fun. So that's Tetsunagi Consulting in a nutshell. With my 20 odd years of experience in Japan, that's my anchor, connecting that to the rest of the world. How's that for
That's a great
1 minute
elevator
pitch?
pitch. And I thought Tetsu meant steel or iron.
Well,
Ah,
my Tetsu means philosophy. Tetsugaku.
Okay.
oh, nice.
Yeah,
All
but
right. So
it's just a
Nick,
homonym.
do you have a pitch for us?
I proudly represent a full service consulting group
Yeah.
because nobody can do it all. And an organization that has somebody in commercial versus somebody in CMC versus somebody in regulatory strategy. But yes, I believe in, the sum of the parts as opposed to the individual parts. And I'll leave it at that. Otherwise I'll start,
Nice.
parroting Tetsu's.
And since no one asked me, I have a pitch, but
Yes,
no, I
please.
actually
Yeah.
just hang out here and talk.
Now give us your pizza on Bio Bullet Train, or what is your dream when you grow up?
No, no, that's it, like exactly. Like I've been very privileged in the sense that, I've worked with Japanese patients in the US, basically helping Japanese, expats as well as, travelers as well, get care in the US as the Japanese speaking physician here in the US and kind of getting them hooked up into the health system and whatnot. And over time, basically in my pharma career, I've done that through basically helping my company license and whatnot from Japanese licensors. But I enjoy definitely that connection part. So it's something, whether it be through work or outside of work, would love to continue bridging that, because somehow a guy like me ended up being born and raised in Japan. There are not that many people. There are surprisingly more than but there are not that many
Yes.
people out there
Mhm.
that kind of have that chance. So I'd like to take advantage of that, and people take advantage of the fact that I was put into that situation. I'd like to offer that, whatever help I can give in that arena
That's
without a formal
fantastic.
company.
No, that's fantastic. Our differences used to be something that we felt, you know, sort of isolated us. But now in the world of internet, we realize that there's more of us around, and if we kind of get together, align our vectors in the right direction, we could do some magical stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
This BioBridge is something we've started without really knowing exactly what we're doing, but this is going out there and people are contacting us. And we've got Nick on the call with us today. This is a message about connecting Japan to the rest of the world, but it can be applied to anything really.
Yeah.
Finding people who've got the same philosophies, the same mission. So how's that?
Yeah, that's great.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
lovely having you, Nick.
Thank you for inviting me, and I can take all my decorations down. No, actually,
I know
it's
next time I go,
permanent.
next time I visit, I'm going to be like, where's that?
Sorry, I was just trying to get some business from an Italian company.
Well, thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
sharing
much.
Okay,
what
thank.
you
It's
do.
been a pleasure.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks.
All right.
Fantastic. Bye bye, everybody. We'll see you next time.